Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. And hey, today I'm super happy to have Jerry Hawthorne on. Jerry Hawthorne, designer of, amongst others, Mice and Mystics, Stuffed Fables, Familiar Tales, Aftermath, Math, and coming soon, Wandering Galaxy, a Crossroads game. So, Jerry, I've been wanting to have you on the Dungeon Dive for a long time. So, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to come on and do this for a while too, so this is pretty cool.
Yeah, Jerry and I have we've talked. We've become Facebook friends, I think you would say. We've been talking for a long time on Facebook about all kinds of stuff. So it's always fun to talk to you and get your input on things, and both game and not game. So th this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is going to be kind of a Jerry's life in game design, and because Jerry has been involved in game design for quite a long time, and there's some interesting things to talk about. So I want to go all the way back in time, Jerry, to before you were a game designer. You were just a game player. And I think we have some commonalities in some of the things that we were influenced by and that we loved. What were some of the major games that got you into hobby gaming? Not just gaming in the mainstream, but specifically hobby gaming.
Well, when I was growing up, my older brother, he was all into war games, World War II simulation, hex and chit style games, and so he taught me games like Squad Leader and Crescendo of Doom and Blitzkrieg and then and then even some space games like Starfleet Battles and stuff like that. And so that was where I really
Starfleet Battles, I'm familiar with Starfleet Battles out of all of those. Yeah, we played that in high school.
yeah. So I kind of got into it when I was a kid, and then my brother went off to join the Air Force, and uh, I was just I kind of craved that interaction and everything, and I ended up discovering Dungeons and Dragons through a friend of mine in junior high school, and then we got obsessed with that, and I played that for years. Um, but then after I joined the military, I went, I would spent my time in the military, and then I got out. I wanted to sort of recreate the little RPG group that I had when I was a kid, and I couldn't get any of my adult friends interested in it at all. And then I found HeroQuest, and it was a board game, and I was able to get my friends to play it, and I could kind of recreate that whole RPG
Yeah,
feeling and everything. And I just basically fell in love with this whole idea of like having a board game RPG that was
yeah,
sort of hybrid.
yeah.
And so that was really where it started. That was about 1990 that I did that.
That's so
And
interesting because I was just talking last Sunday. I was talking to Richard Lanius, and because I'm doing a big deep dive series into Arkham Horror soon, and we came to that same conclusion that a lot of the games that we like are we kind of see them as RPG substitutes in a way. They give us a lot of those same kind of things that we look for in an RPG, but without a lot of the upfront work that you need to play an RPG.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then the ability to get people who don't really relate to RPGs but can play a board game and relate to a board game, and having a game that kind of delivers that. In our case, when we were in our 20s, HeroQuest was the thing because every Friday night we would get together, we would play through a quest on HeroQuest, and then we would all go out and party, go out on the town and party and stuff like that. So it was like kind of like our little icebreaker thing at the beginning of every Friday night, and it was a huge amount of fun. There was just lots of table talk and stuff, and the game is so light that you could get
yeah,
anybody into it. It doesn't really it doesn't get it in the way of just the fun and everything. So
yeah. It's Hero Quest is so basic that it's almost more of an activity than a game, but it facilitates so much fun, right?
I mean, yeah, if obviously we brought more to it than
Yeah,
just the
yeah,
game. And in hindsight, I've gone back and I've because I play HeroQuest to this day. I play it now, the new version and everything.
yep.
And I'm very well aware now of how thin the gameplay is, and how non-existent, that it's just it is a strange little game because it's greater than the sum of its parts. In other words,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think what most people like about it is that it's just so open to interpretation, so stripped down of everything that you can kind of just, ad lib all the other stuff onto it and stuff, which is what I did. I would be the one who was playing the Zargon role. So I was basically the game master all those years that we played. And I just made up stuff. I actually turned it into like a little RPG. And so they didn't know they were playing an RPG. They just thought they
Yeah.
were playing a
You
board game.
you tricked them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've talked about HeroQuest a lot, and you know that I have just now in my almost 50s gotten into HeroQuest because I never
Mhm.
really liked it before because I like simple games, but I don't like that one versus many adversarial games. And just HeroQuest just never did it for me. But with this new version and with all of the decades now of fan supplements and material out there to really change it into the kind of game that I want it to be, I love it now.
Yeah.
It's great. It's so much fun. And the
Yeah.
toy factor is just off the charts fun.
Yeah. I still love it. I still get that same sort of, I don't know. I guess I'll just never not love it. Um,
Yeah, yeah. So was HeroQuest really one of your main like influences as far as what
well,
you wanted to do with with
well,
game design?
I mean, it sparked a sort of a tinkering in me where I was just
Yeah,
tinkering with things because I was making so much of my own content for HeroQuest, and then eventually I discovered the internet um, in the early days, and there was some HeroQuest websites that popped up eventually, and those there used to be community forums before we had social media and stuff, and so
yep.
I met people from around the world, and we would send our quests that we made. We would send by mail, by snail mail, to each other,
Yeah.
and we would create them, and then we would print them, and then we would send them to each other. We would exchange information and evaluate each other's works and stuff like that. But so that sort of like that tinkering and everything was a big part of what drove my hobby back then. So, and probably, it probably just was something that I was just so accustomed to doing that when I did discover Heroscape, which is interesting because the reason I discovered Heroscape is because I was on the internet and I was looking at images from the New York City Toy Fair in 2004, and there was showed images of the upcoming Hasbro releases, and I saw a game with hexes, with plastic hexes and stuff. It looked really cool, and then I noticed that it had HeroQuest miniatures on it, and so I started like checking into it. I got really obsessed with this. It's like, what is this game? And I found out it was co-designed by Stephen Baker, who is the creator of HeroQuest. And so then I became even more obsessed with it, and I started doing regular searches for any kind of information I could find on the internet. And a website popped up one day, uh, and it was a website that was put together by Craig Van Ness, a friend of Craig Van Ness, and Craig Van Ness is the main lead designer on HeroScape. Anyways, his friend made a website to kind of promote the game and also to practice his web design skills. I signed up to that, and I was one of five members of the little community forum there. One was Craig Van Ness, another one was Rob Davio. Um,
Oh
you know,
wow, man.
yeah,
Like that
and
whole it's like that whole little it's almost like the new Hollywood directors. You guys had your own little like a new game designer group all kind of circling around Heroscape, huh?
yeah, I mean they were really excited about the game. It hadn't been released yet, and I was really
Hmm.
excited about it. So I got to actually kind of communicate with them prior to the game even being released. And then when it was released, I played it with my nephews, and my brother and my nephews and stuff. We had a great time. And I had mentioned it to Craig Van Ness, and he said, hey, send me an email and tell me how it went and everything. Give me the details and stuff. And anyways, he ended up inviting me to become a playtester on HeroScape. Just right off the bat at the very, very beginnings of HeroScape. And I became a playtester and then eventually, worked up to where I was actually designing units and stuff for HeroScape. And
Yeah.
um, eventually I did the Dungeons and Dragons version of HeroScape. I was one of the three designers, co-designers that worked
Yeah.
on that.
So at that point, you were hired. You were a paid employee of was it Hasbro?
Hasbro, yeah,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
Wizards of the Coast. So I ended up
Yeah.
starting from playtesting and then getting all the way up to where they were paying me. I did Battleship Galaxies, which is a
Yep.
game you probably may have heard of.
Yep.
And then one of the other play testers who was getting a lot of work from Hasbro at the time was Colby Dowk, who's now my
Yep.
boss. But um, he he designed a card game called Summoner Wars, and he
Yep.
tried to pitch to Hasbro, and they didn't. They, I mean,
Oh, did Hasbro really Hasbro turn down Summoner Wars,
they
huh?
turned down Summoner Wars, yeah. And so what he did is he just he took some of the money that he made from the from doing his freelance work, and he spun off and created Plaid Hat Games.
Flat Hat,
And
yeah.
then I eventually joined him in Plaid Hat Games.
So
So
did he kind of poach you from Hasbro, or were you guys friends? And so did you kind of follow him over, or what was the what
well,
was the
I was a freelancer. We were freelancers, so you don't really
okay, so you
poach
guys were
off. But
freelancers. Yeah.
um, what happened is so he started up his own company,
Yep.
and he had that one game. And if you're going to have a little game company, you need more than just one game.
Was
And
what was Summoner Wars Plaid Hat's first, was that their
yeah,
first game? Okay,
yeah,
okay. Hmm.
that is what launched Plaid Hat Games. And so he was like, "Do you?" He goes, "You're always talking about tinkering around with like little game design ideas. Are you working on anything right now?" And I said, "Well, I I've been working on a game about mice to
Yep.
help my daughter learn how to read, and I had been researching because she was struggling with reading, and I was researching like things that you could do. And one of the things I read is that you could break up the reading into little short bursts and then do some other kind of activity in between the reading. And I was trying to brainstorm some kind of activity that I could do with her that we could both enjoy. And she loved mice at the time. She was obsessed with mice. She had a couple of pet mice. She had a bunch of little stuffed mice and everything. So I was like, oh, I'll make a little game about mice on an adventure. And then I'll have narrative elements that we can read together. And then we could play some game and then we could read. And then we could play some game and we could read. And that's basically how Mice and Mystics got
Mice
started.
and Mystics, 2012. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, this was back in 2009 at the time. But Colby asked me if I was, if I had any ideas, and I was like, "Well, I'm working on this little adventure game with mice, and there's a currency in the game, and it's with cheese, and it's kind of like a little HeroQuest, but with mice kind of thing, and some narrative." And he's like, "Don't pitch it to anybody. I want to see this game.
Yeah.
Can you have a prototype ready in time for Gen Con?" And which was about 5 months away. So I was like an idiot, I was like, yes.
Yeah,
you know,
sure. Yeah, no problem.
so what was just a little tiny tinkering and a little bit of a story that I had written, suddenly I had 5 months to create a game and have a prototype, and I had to show it at Gen Con. So I started working on it diligently, and then I did at Gen Con. I did pitch it to Colby, and then um, because he was young and new in the world of publishing, he had all of his connections, all of his network connections, bigger, more established publishers. They were in the room along with a bunch of other people. There's like a dozen people in the room when I had to demonstrate my game for them and everything, and everybody just freaking fell in love with Mice and Mystics. And so that was how it got going.
Now, did you have because what drew me originally to Mice and Mystics, well, there was two things. Let's talk about the first one first. Was I love beast epics, and I don't know if I coined it or if it's probably been around, but critter crawls is what I call these kinds of games. And
Yeah.
I love, so growing up, I was a huge fan of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the original RPG and stuff like Yasagi Yojimbo. So were you
Mhm.
looking at Mice and Mystics as kind of in that school, or like a Red Wall school, or was it all just because your daughter loved mice?
Well, so uh, the idea for the game, the basic idea for how the game functioned and stuff, and like really what I wanted to recreate was I had seen the movie The Incredibles,
Hmm.
and what I liked about the movie The Incredibles is it was a family
Hmm.
adventure,
Yeah.
and that each of the four characters, adventuring party, each of the four
Yep.
characters each had their own ability that also matched their personality. The
Yeah.
dad is super strong. The mom's got to be flexible. The kid's fast. The daughter feels like she's invisible. I mean, all of this stuff sort of really meshed. And I thought, wouldn't this be cool if it was a game where a family was playing the game and everybody could have that different
Yeah.
part? And then my daughter was into mice. And so I was like, well, what if it was little mice and they each had their own little part? And you can kind of see that reflected in the characters in Mice and
Yeah.
Mystics. That they reflect more RPG characters, but there still is that kind of element. You'll have the strong one, and then the sneaky one, and that sort of stuff. But um, Redwall probably is the main influence when it comes to like
Hmm.
trying to capture this sort of theme, of like of RPG, you know, medieval fantasy, but with mice
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, after I started work on it, I was diving into research about Mouse Templar, and I loved, you know, Mouse Guard,
Mouse
and
guard. Yeah.
um, there's,
There was a mice were very popular in nerd culture in the
yeah,
mid 2000s, weren't they?
yeah. Actually, they kind of were. They kind of were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, And one thing I also really liked a lot, and I always mention this, is I love Tom and Jerry, the cartoon. One of the reasons I love Tom and Jerry so much is that it played with scale so much. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Like whenever you're watching Tom and Jerry, the mundane things in your household are suddenly you see them through a new light because of the adventures of Tom and Jerry. And I loved how the adults, any human beings, were only just seen from their like kneecaps down, right? And so
Yeah.
this sense of scale is very well realized, and that I wanted to recreate that in Mice and Mystics and have this sense of scale, so that like if you were interacting with a human being in Mice and Mystics, they weren't really on screen. They
Yeah. Yeah.
even when you're being attacked by a cat, it's just the paw that you're
The
getting
pause. Hmm.
attacked. Yeah,
Yeah, and that translates really well to all of the equipment and the gear being interesting ways to use tiny objects, needles as swords and that kind of thing. Because there's kind of
yeah,
two ways to look at the beast epic, and that is, sometimes they are the beasts, TMNT, Usagi Yojimbo, they're presented as human-sized animals.
yeah.
But then you can also look at it as animal-sized animals, and there's kind of two different schools of thought there. But you kind of combine that in Mice and Mystics, because in Mice and Mystics, the animals were human, and they were cursed
Yeah.
into. So I'm just curious, was there a reason why you did that? Was it more of a story element for your daughter, or what was the reason of the mice having human roots?
Well, so I mean, you could probably look at all my games and realize that one big element of my games is there's always this big transition, some big giant
Mm-hmm.
transition that thrusts people into an experience that wasn't expected and is outside of their normal experiences and stuff. So this idea of being humans and then suddenly being thrust into this whole thing where they're now little my-sized things, I think that just added to the whole. It made it feel much more story-like, but you're also able to
Yeah,
relate because you get to see the mouse world through the eyes of a human. So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It gives the player kind of a connection to the mundane
yeah.
through which to filter that fantasy. Yeah. So There were quite a few expansions. I think two or three pretty good sized expansions for Mice and Mystics. Were you involved in the creation of the expansions as well?
Yeah, when I actually designed my Mystics, I didn't stop designing it. I just kept on with more content, and it was going to go straight from the base game to Downwood Tales. And
Hmm.
but when we saw the popularity of Mice and Mystics right out of the gate, um, my Colby was demanded that we have something smaller to satisfy the people, to give them more content while I was still working on the big expansion. And so I
Yeah,
made
we'll
this
give
little.
him the that long tail. I think it's the long tail is something Jerry and I have talked about for a long time of not front loading everything for a game and keeping people interested in it to build this kind of almost like a grassroots level of fans around the game.
Yeah, I mean, back then they didn't have there really wasn't crowdfunding back then, and
No.
so it was very common. So when your tail started to taper off to release an expansion, and that got interest back in the game again, and it brought the game back to life, and you would do that. But what our biggest problem with Mice and Mystics at that time was that we just couldn't keep up with the demand, and so
Yeah.
um, we wanted to create some more content that to put out there and stuff. And so I did Heart of Glorm, which I absolutely love Heart of Glorm. The whole it was like a little love story, like a little side story kind of thing, and it was kind of a Phantom of the Opera, but the main villain is a glowworm named
Yeah.
Glorm, and he it, I don't know. It's just a little side tale. Takes the game in a little bit of a darker direction and stuff, and it's just
Is that where the Shrew character was from?
no. Diddy the Shrew comes out in
Okay.
Downward.
Okay.
Yeah,
My wife loves her.
yeah, yeah. Diddy the Shrew. She starts off as this mysterious character.
Yeah.
So she starts off as a villain, and then she ends up being part of your adventuring party and stuff. And she's this shadowy, enigmatic villain until you actually really meet her, and then she's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I mentioned two reasons why I was drawn to Mice and Mystics originally. And the second reason was people need to realize that back in just in 2012, there weren't a huge number of adventure games or dungeon crawls
Uh-uh.
on the market.
Oh,
When, we had Descent,
mm-hmm.
we had Runebound, and really after those two, Mice and Mystics is the one that comes to my mind as being like, wow, we went to the game store and here's another fantasy dungeon crawl. Here's another fantasy adventure game. That's pure adventure. And do you think that maybe, I mean, even though it was wildly successful, I'm wondering if it was kind of ahead of its time in what people were looking for. If it had come out even 5 years later, it would have been just a massive success. I don't know. I don't know. It just seems like people, I don't know, maybe what I'm asking is, did you see a lack of hunger for these kinds of games in the mid 20s, or do you think people were just the gamer has changed over time? It has wanted them more now.
I don't know. I mean, I don't. I'm not that ego driven, so I don't really try
Mhm.
to think of my games as being or as being ahead of the curve or whatever. But one thing I do know is that I was a firm believer, and then nothing really existed at the time that satisfied me when it came to narrative. And I was a firm
Yeah,
believer that
yeah.
if people played a game that had a story that was like really well realized and integrated into the game, and I think I felt like that would be a compelling thing. And now it's very common. Like all
Yeah.
these, like, think of a game like Tainted Grail, right? Well, before Mice and Mystics came out, there was nothing like that had big old story elements in it. Really,
Yeah.
nothing. You would have a flavor text or or you might start a game and it would give you a bunch of background, story, and then you play the game, and then you might get
And then you
ending story.
read, yeah.
but there was never something that was just constantly, where you were constantly interacting with the story, outside of game books.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and like one of the things that people would say to me when Mice and Mystics came out was like, "This is kind of like a choose your own adventure book made into a board game." It was like,
yeah,
and it was like, I grew up on choose your own adventure books. I mean, so I mean, there's obviously some elements of that in there, but if you think about it now, there's just these are very commonplace. There's
yeah.
lots of out there, lots of choose your own adventure elements added into the board game space, and so maybe I don't know about it being ahead of the curve, but I mean, maybe I was, one of the first that started to pop up with that. So maybe I don't know whether.
Yeah, and no, I think that's true. And I think you tackled that not problem, but you tackled that design space, I think, with an even better design next with Stuffed Fables. That combination of game and story. And I've often wondered with Mice and Mystics, did you ever even think of putting the game boards and story in a book? Or was that something that came because you can see those design elements there. For those of you that don't know, Stuffed Fables was, I think it was your first storybook game where you open up a book and one side is the game board and the other side is the story and the rules that pertain to that game board. You can see that in Mice and Mystics. You can see
Yeah.
that game board and the storybook, but they weren't combined into one.
Mm.
And then here comes Stuffed Fables where you combine them into one. And to me, that was just kind of like a genius move. It just made so much sense.
Yeah, I actually was going to have two books with Stuffed Fables. One book with the
Uh-huh.
maps, and the other book with the story. And Colby, my boss, said, "No, you got to figure out a way to put them into one book. If you can
Oh
do
man, what
that,
a great that's
if you can do
a
that,
sign of a good developer, right? Of helping the designer push the
yeah,
design into an interesting space.
yeah. I mean, it actually sent me for like into a sort of like a, how you get stuck on a puzzle, like, oh, I got to
Yeah.
figure the puzzle out. He basically sent me. He's like, oh, this is a great idea. I would love to, we need to explore this further, but you got to figure out a way to put these into one book. And so they
Hmm.
just flip the pages and you have it all right there. And I'm like, oh man. So I set out to like try to do that, and now again, now you see these books everywhere, but
Yeah.
like this, we were the first to like have this adventure book where you're going through the pages like that.
Yeah.
Um, and
I
yeah,
mean
I'm
that
glad that he
oh
pushed me.
good.
I'm glad he pushed me to do that.
Yeah,
So,
that's really interesting. I wonder what he saw. I wonder what he saw. Like, what was he thinking about when he said like those things need to be combined? Because I think of it in terms of table space, and that's one of the reasons why I love that design. And I wish more dungeon crawls today had that kind of design, like Jaws of the Lion. I prefer Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion way more than Gloomhaven because I know how much space it's going to take on my table when I set it up. And
yeah,
having that book just laid out is it's such a thoughtful design.
yeah. I mean, it was pretty amazing. It was really hard. It was really hard to do, because I was trying to make a maps that would be, interesting to play on that were on one side, and then the other side I had to make all those story elements fit on that
Hmm.
page, which
Yeah.
is actually probably pretty good, to be limited in such a way. Just the natural limitations. Sometimes I find that really helps with my design process to have
You
these
like limitations, I think. As far as we've talked about
do.
that before, you like what can I do with 20 cards? What can I do with everything that fits in a smaller box? What can I
Yes,
do with only a certain number of pages? Do you think that kind of gives you focus?
it does, and I think it hones your skills as a designer to work within these parameters. And you know what? It also goes back to my roots of like when I started working for Hasbro. When we had strict limitations, like this is what you had to make these things fit within these limitations. And one of those would be like card space. So if you were writing an ability for a hero character in Heroscape, you only had a certain amount of space that you had to work within, and so you couldn't come up with too crazy ideas. Not to mention the fact that you don't want your players having to sit there and read an ability that's like 3 paragraphs long,
Yeah, it was
while
like
they're in the
seven
middle
point
of a.
font. Yeah.
You don't want to take them out of the experience. You want to have flow, and so learning that there is a talent and a skill involved with that, but with those working within limitations, I just find that to be so fascinating. That's why I see nowadays, I think Kickstarter and stuff like that, I'm not going to complain about it, but I think it strips away a lot of
Yeah.
these good limitations that
Yeah.
designers had to work within before. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, I don't know, but what it creates are, I think, this amount of excess in games where they're your players are inclined to purchase more than what they can actually consume. And
Yeah.
I think that's just wrong. I
Yeah.
think I think when I think consumers should always be purchasing the perfect amount of satisfying products for their hobby.
Yeah, I mean that's much harder to do. I think one of the people who I've talked about this a lot to also is with Jason Glover, the designer of Iron Helm. And
Yeah.
and he actually goes to Game Crafter and says, "Okay, I can buy this size box. This size box can fit 40 cards.
Hmm.
I designed the game to the box,
Yes.
to the number of cards that come on one of the large sheets of
Yeah.
cards. That's how much I
Hmm.
have to work with. What can I
Yeah.
do with this?" And that's a really
Exactly.
interesting way to go.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do a lot of that too at Plathead Games. Like we know. I mean, we know what the size box is that we want the game to fit in.
Uh-huh.
You know, in the case with Wandering Galaxies coming up, the box ended up being a little bit bigger. And the only reason is because it has a card catalog like Lands of Galzyr. And
Uh-huh.
so
Yeah.
the card catalog is just literally too tall with the cards upright like that.
To fit in this typical plaid hat size box.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
But man,
I think you and I we could probably talk for an hour just on Lands of Galzyr.
it's like one of my favorites. You'll see a lot of the fact that I love Lands of Galzyr so much. You'll see a lot of that in Wandering Galaxies because I use the card catalog and the way that you adventure around, traveling around, going on these little mini adventures. That's what I love about Lands of Galzyr.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're passing through the mountains. Okay, you have a little mountain adventure, and it's like a little short little adventure that you have, and then you just move about your merry way.
Let's talk so you kind of moved into starting to use apps in your games. I don't want to get too far ahead, but
Yeah.
I'm curious, were you thinking about apps at all uh back in like around that time of stuff Fables or maybe Comanauts? Was that I'm trying to think of the first real app-based game. Was it Mansions of Madness or
Uh,
maybe Descent to it
it
2E?
was
Like it
XCOM.
was
XCOM was
XCOM. XCOM was kind of the first big one, wasn't it? Yeah. Were you thinking about apps at all with any of your early games and just not being able to implement the technology?
I, I respected the technology, and I never for a moment thought that it would ever be something that I would be able to work with. But I've never been negative towards apps. I've always
Yeah.
felt like, man, wouldn't it be great if you could have an adventure game and then you have the app that would give you a lot of variety and because to be honest with you, the actual just if you're just using physical components and you want to tell a narrative game, there's a lot of there's a lot of crazy fiddliness that comes along with managing a bunch of little cards and
Yeah.
storybooks and all this stuff. And there's I just think that the app just makes a ton more sense, just in the way that it organizes information.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not a big
agree.
fan of games that have a bunch of gameplay that they transfer into the app. I don't want the app to
Yeah.
like carry a bunch of gameplay stuff. Like in HeroQuest, the fact that you have to actually move your dude on
Move.
HeroQuest,
Yeah.
then move your dude on the map. I don't like that at all. But
I don't like that either. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to complain too much about their app because I understand why their app is
It's
the
a
way.
it's a well-designed app. It's just not the way I want to play that game. But like you, I love apps and games. When they're
Mhm.
done well, Lands of Galzyr, Mansions of Madness Second Edition. That game is brilliant with the app. The recent Plaid Hat game, Freelancers, amazing app-based game. And yeah, then Wandering Galaxies will have an app as well that kind of acts as that storybook, as that guide through the overall narrative.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we kind of started talking on Facebook right around the time of Comanauts because I
Hmm.
had some pretty major issues with the rules in Comanauts, and it's one of the only games that I've ever read through the rules, and that I was just not ever able to figure out how to play, and it always bothered me so much because that game seemed so cool. And it's kind of another, I think, progression in between. So you had stuff Fables coming out, you kind of combine the map and you combine the narrative. And then the next game would be Comanauts in 2019. And Comanauts, I feel, is maybe kind of it's kind of you moving into a more adult space where I think Mice and Mystics and Stuffed Fables are, I'm not saying they're kids games, but they are focused on a kids style narrative, but I still love them. But Comanauts was a very kind of adult themed game. You were exploring the memories of a man dying, correct? Or was he already dead?
No, he's in a coma.
He's in a
Um,
coma. So he's
he's
like, yeah, you have to kind of save him, bring him back from.
he holds the key to saving the world, and so you have to bring
Mhm.
him back from his coma so that he can finish his work and save the world.
Now, no, so that rule book was up to this point the slimmest rule book I think any of your games. And I think that was one of the issues. And right before Stuffed Fables, something happened to Plaid Hat Games where they were purchased by Asmodee.
Yes.
When Asmodee went on their big buying spree, and so that was a
Mhm.
big milestone. That was in 2015, I believe. Comanauts was in 2019. Did they put? Do you feel like they put a pressure to slim down a rule book to try to do even less to make the profit margin higher? Did you feel anything like that with Comanauts?
No, I don't think that there was a. I don't think it was a profit margin issue. I think at Plaid Hat Games we've always had this philosophy that rule books are basically a barrier in the
Yep.
way of playing a game. In order to play your game, there's this huge hurdle you have to cross, and the bigger the rule book, the more intimidating that is for people. Um, and so trying to have games that are mainstream enough so that they can be taught to a lot of different people, or they can be appealed. You can appeal to a wider variety of people. Having a small rule book is a very good thing because they look, they're like, okay, this is just 4 pages, 5 pages, or whatever, But um, the problem of like taking a game that has a high concept like Comanauts and like trying to
Yeah.
reduce it into this smaller rule book was, in hindsight, was just a mistake. I mean, it should have had more pages of visual, tutorials and stuff like that, examples, and there were, numerous errors that slipped through editing process, and that. I mean, I'm not trying to abdicate any of my responsibility, but game designers, we're not like in charge of everything.
Yeah. Correct.
I don't do everything. Especially in a narrative game where I'm spending an enormous amount of time writing stories and play testing and doing that stuff. The technical writing, a lot of my technical writing is filtered through, a process that involves a bunch of different people and editors and stuff like that. And so um, Comanauts, was a victim of that whole process at a time when our company was, in a little bit of a flux,
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah.
And it did improve when I did Aftermath, which came
Yeah.
after Comanauts. It improved with Aftermath, but there's still, some lack of like good examples, I think. And so our rule books are a ton better now. Um,
I love the rule book for Dungeon Run.
yeah, the old one
I
that with the
with the
humor in it.
characters. Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's great. It's actually one of my favorite. It's actually one of my favorite rule books.
I actually like that conversational style
Yeah,
rule book myself. Those are
yeah.
what I prefer.
But one of the reasons why I was so bummed out with Comanauts because I wanted to like it so much, and one of the reasons for that is I remember seeing a video where Becca Scott played the game at a convention. I think she played with you,
Hmm.
and she had a really strong emotional response to the game. And
Yeah,
I
we
thought
started
that was
crying.
really, yeah, I thought that was really incredible. Like, and it frustrated me so much because I wanted to feel that. And I had never seen somebody like feel that from a board game before. And I thought that was amazing. That was really cool. What like how did you feel when that was happening?
I mean, I knew that there was some emotional gravity to the game because I had
Yeah.
written the whole story and stuff like while my mom was dying of cancer and stuff, and I was
Mhm.
like, there was an enormous amount of grief flowing through my heart and mind when I was working on Comanauts, and I think that's some of that has been there's the game has a the story to the game has like a strong feeling of nostalgia, um,
Yeah. You're kind of
intentionally
like
because
going through, yeah, I can see that now. You're kind of like going through, I think there's like some cyberpunk, there's some fantasy. It's almost like you're going back through your memories of like the important kind of pop cultural touchstones of your life.
yeah, I mean what you're doing is you're in order to infiltrate his mind, you have to go in disguised as characters from that are in his mind, whether they're real life people that he knew or fantasy characters that he liked. You just kind of go, you just pop into his mind, and the characters. I mean, the players in the game are just basically dealt these cards that and you have to play through these characters, taking on uh, their avatar as you're in there. And so that mixed with there's like this blending of reality mixed with fantasy in the game that that that's meaningful because they mesh in some way or another.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was really cool. I think I was actually I have in my notes pairing Comanauts with stuffed fables. I was asking what was going on in Jerry's life during these two games because stuffed fables is kind of dealing with some childhood trauma of getting kids used to sleeping in adult beds for the first time and dealing with fear. And then Comanauts, you have kind of the fear of death. And so yeah, it's really interesting, that like you're like you said, your mom was dealing with cancer at the time.
Yeah.
So it's almost like your emotional period of of game design, of translating all of that stuff. That's really interesting. Um, but yeah, after Comanauts, you kind of have your like your biggest game, I think, maybe up until coming up soon, Wandering Galaxy, but Aftermath. And Aftermath was kind of your return to a critter crawl. We have animals. We have, I think this is, would you consider this your first kind of real campaign where your first real campaign game where mechanisms, components, character progression, where everything carries over throughout one full game?
Yeah.
Why what was the decision there to go with a campaign as opposed to more just a narrative structure or something like that?
Well, I wanted to have the players have this colony management
I
sort of
love that. Yeah, that's my favorite thing in Aftermath is the colony
yeah.
management. Yeah.
And so I thought it would be really cool if you could have like colony management basically be the thing that's the legacy element in the game, and then the players are just going out into the world, having these interactions and stuff, but really trying to manage this colony, grow this colony, and the you know, the player characters are neophytes and they are learning how to be providers. And so I don't know, the whole idea of like this providing for this colony and being in over your head and being young and having to like rise to the occasion and stuff. I thought that that would be more well realized in a campaign style game.
Hmm.
In fact, it was like the whole idea was never separate from being a campaign game from the get go.
From the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, having that settlement, I love that idea. That's kind of like my favorite way to play RPGs is that kind of West Marches approach where you have a base camp and then each day you just kind of set off on an adventure. And
yeah,
Aftermath was really good at that by having all the side quests and you didn't always have to focus on the main story. You could go off and do other things and the settlement ends up being kind of the main character of the game. And however, Aftermath kind of died quickly without any expansions or anything. What happened with Aftermath was it seemed to me like that was a game that was setting up a bigger world, a bigger universe that you could return to.
yeah. I mean, some of it I can't talk about, or I shouldn't talk about. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
Nobody
yeah.
told me I can't talk about it, but it seems like one of those things that you shouldn't talk about. But after I mean, I released Aftermath, and then shortly after that, we left Asmodee. So
Yeah.
they all the expansions, which were already designed and play tested, and they'd already, I mean, everything was done on them. Like the factory samples had come back. We had boxes. We had the games were done. They were just at the printer waiting for the green light, and that was all about the time that we split off from Asmodee, and so they just didn't follow through on those. And there are more reasons for it that had nothing to do with the success of the game, but there are more reasons for why
Yeah.
they did continue on with
Yeah.
it. But I just really can't talk about those. So
No, that's fine. Yeah, I understand. Does it bum you out to have created this world of Aftermath and then kind of having to leave that behind?
it bums me out. It still bums me out. I actually
Yeah.
there are two worlds that I've created that I love the most, and that's Mice and Mystics and Aftermath. I just love those settings. And it's not just having to do with the critter crawl, which I love anyway, but I really think, I really think that Mice and Mystics was. I mean, I still have a lot of stories that I've written for it and stuff, and it's some of my best writing and some of my best story creation.
Hmm.
And then Aftermath, I think, is some of my best world building that I've ever done. I just,
I love the world. Yeah. Yeah, I
it's
agree.
just, yeah, it's just some of my favorite, and I really, really love the colony management in it. I feel like I nailed that, and there was so much that I was going to continue on doing with it and everything. Just like huge, huge ideas, coming down the pike. So yeah,
Now, when Asmodee bought Flat Hat, did they end up with the rights to Mice and Mystics in that purchase, or were you guys able to get the rights back to Mice and Mystics after you went independent
no,
again? And
no, they still
and
have it.
oh, they still have it. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I know there's also been, I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, recently, there was some rumors of some film options for Mice and Mystics.
Yeah, for a while there.
Yeah.
You know, there's a director named Alex Aja. He did
Oh,
The Hills
yeah.
Have Eyes, the
The-
new version.
And
Uh,
yeah, yeah. And a Harry Potter movie, right? The Prisoner of Azkaban. Is that him?
Maybe, I don't
No,
know.
maybe. I don't. I'll throw it on screen. Maybe not. But yeah, The Hills Have Eyes remake. That's a good movie.
Yeah, you may be right because he did want to cast what's his name as the role of Colin, the Harry Potter actor. His name is slipping my mind right now. But
Daniel Radcliffe.
Daniel Radcliffe, yes, his voice as a
Yeah.
voice actor for Colin.
Of Colin the mouse of the
Yeah,
main one of the main characters in My
mhm,
Mystics. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Oh
But
wow, interesting.
yeah, so anyways, um, he discovered My Mystics, was playing through it with his son, and he again, just like me, he fell in love with this idea of like scale, working with scale. He really wanted to work with the camera angles and stuff that would really bring it to life and everything. And he wanted to use the motion capture technology with the actors so that their faces would morph into mice real nicely and stuff. And uh, yeah, he was really gung ho about making the movie. And he shopped it around. It got picked up by several different studios, and then eventually, dropped, and then picked up again by a different studio, and then dropped. And throughout all that time, I got paid for releasing the movie rights to them. They leased it from me while they
Yeah.
shopped it around. So I made money off of all of that, but the movie never got made.
Do you think, I mean, how cool would that have been to see a board game you created on the movie screen? That would have been pretty wild, huh?
It would have been life changing. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
when negotiating the contracts and everything, I had to go. I mean, these contracts are crazy. Like, one of the things that is a point of negotiation in the contract is how many seats you're allowed to have at the premiere of the movie when it shows somewhere. They gave me 2 seats, like me and one other
You,
person.
you,
I'm like, well, I have 2 kids. I have a wife and 2 kids. Could I get 4 seats? No, no,
no, you're not important.
two
You're not
seats,
important enough as the creator of the property.
2 seats. And they're like, you have to negotiate things for theme park rides. Like, what if they make a theme park ride? What's your cut off of that? And like, it's
Huh.
crazy. It's crazy.
That's
And then credits, like, okay, where are your credits going to be? When are your credits going to be on screen? And what kind of that's all part of the contract negotiations as well.
Yeah, because I know the screen act. I mean, the Hollywood. A lot of that is designed by the unions. They have certain rules where the one union gets placed above the other, and there can't be, for a long time there couldn't be two people listed as director or something. I don't know. There's all these weird rules that go into credits. It's kind of interesting how minute into the details they get on that.
They do, yeah.
Um, so yeah, so 2020, big Plaid Hat goes independent again. Much of to great cheer from a lot of us because we saw kind of Asmodee gobbling up all of these companies and games, and then Flat Hat breaks free, goes independent again, and then you come out with, I think, maybe your best game to date, and that is Familiar Tales in 2022. And Familiar Tales, your first app-based game. Were you thinking with Aftermath? Was there ever an app? Did you ever even contemplate an app with Aftermath to handle some of the
No,
campaign stuff? No.
it
Okay,
wasn't even
interesting.
it wasn't even on the radar. Um, so yeah, the whole idea of doing an app came about after we made Forgotten Waters.
Oh yeah, Forgotten Waters was before Familiar Tales, wasn't it? That's one
It
that I
was.
always forget about because from everything I've heard, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to be more focused on group play of
The
some social interaction that might be lost in a solo as a solo player.
Yeah, probably would be lost as a solo player. There,
Mhm.
it is more focused. It's almost like a party game,
Yeah.
but also an adventure kind of thing.
Now, did you
Um,
guys design the app technology in-house? Your app that you
we have
use?
a we have Joseph Ellis, who is our staff tech guy that does all of
Uh-huh.
our website stuff and everything. He's on our staff, and so he designed the apps for all of our
Wow.
games,
Wow.
and the Summoner Wars app on the
Yep.
um, on the iTunes App Store.
Yep.
Um, and I mean, he's he's good. He's
I
really
think your
good.
apps are great. Yeah, and they're not apps. So, I mean, they're not officially apps. They're websites that you don't even have
Yeah,
to download anything. And yeah, that's
that's right.
that's really cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, so Familiar Tales, you have an app. What how did having an app change your design process from even from just Aftermath? Like what did that do to your mental space there?
Well, it was liberating because I could tell. stories that branched in more complex ways, because the app handles all that so that the players don't have to get in the weeds with all that stuff. And it allows the players to stay more immersed in just playing the game, listening to the story, and enjoying and stuff rather than any sort of laborious task of thumbing through books pages to get to certain entries and stuff like that. If you do if you do something physical and it has a bunch of branching choices, you're going to be flipping all around and stuff. And it's just and then somebody has to do the reading, and not everybody wants to do that or is comfortable with that. And nobody has to do that with the app. It just does it for you, and it does it in a glorious fashion with sound effects and music and actors and everything. So
Did was the audio production handled in-house?
yes, we have our sound engineer is Donald Schultz, and he used to work for a company that did the voices for anime that were being translated into English.
Yeah, for the dubs, for the English dubs.
Yeah, and so that was his previous experience, and we've been friends with him for years. I mean, I think it was back 2012 maybe. I was they had a little YouTube channel called Bored with Life. Have you ever seen it?
No, I've never seen Board with Life.
Well, they made basically it was like a sitcom, kind of like watching Roseanne or some other sitcom like that, but it was all about these young college age kids who played board games a lot, and it just had all these little comedy bits. But then they would also do board game reviews and stuff like that, and they had me on for an interview on there, and that's how I met Donald Schultz and Nikki Schultz, and the members of Board with Life, and that's how Colby got to know them. And so now Donald and Nikki Schultz both work for us.
Isn't that interesting how a board game publisher now has an in-house audio department?
Yeah,
I mean,
I think we're kind of unique. Our staff has got a unique set of skills.
yeah, that's wild.
I don't know
It
of
kind
any
of
others that have that sort of thing.
yeah, there's all of that in-house without farming it out. That's really cool. And Familiar Tales also, I think, kind of progressed the card-based action system that you introduced in Aftermath, and it's much smoother in Familiar Tales. It makes a little more logical sense with how you play the game. And I think that game also, in my opinion, reintroduced just a great rule book to to your games. I loved learning that game. I loved setting it up. I think we've talked before, and I've talked on the channel before about how the when somebody gets a game, the experience doesn't start when they start playing the game the first time. The experience starts when you open the box.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why Games Workshop is one of my favorite publishers, because when you open a Games Workshop game, you are immediately presented with something cool, some kind of art or story or something. And I felt that way with Familiar Tales. Like just opening the box, getting everything ready to go, the whole just being onboarded to the game was such a pleasant experience. Did you focus a lot on that? Was that part of
Yeah,
the overall design? Was just the ease of getting the player just to that spot where they can actually start playing the game?
yeah. So that's another thing that the app really does for us is that barrier of entry that I talked about earlier. The app really helps with that because what it does is it'll just walk you through the setup process, which makes it really easy. And it's got little animated,
Yeah.
you know, images and stuff that are animated to show you what to do. And then once you get started, then the tutorial is there for you. And so the game will walk you through the gameplay. So it onboards pretty well.
Yeah, it does a really good job. There's a thing that I talk about a lot also where you learn a game, you put it back on your shelf, then you get it back out, and it's the relearning process. And sometimes the relearning can be even more frustrating than the original learn because you think, man, I just played this game. I should I should remember how it goes. But in between those two plays, you've played five other games that have somewhat similar but slightly different rules. And having that app there to guide you through that process and to get your brain going, to get your brain locked into that game just really does help a lot.
Yeah, yeah, man, I can totally relate about that.
I think we've
Forgetting how to
talked,
play a game between plays.
yeah, and there's so many games that we play that are very similar,
Hmm.
moving from space to space. And then but you come into ideas of these little things that are always different. And like game designers can't say they can't seem to get on the same page about, okay, what is adjacent? Is orthogonal adjacent only, or are the diagonals considered
Yeah,
adjacent? And
it changes from game
everything
to
has to be different
game. It changes from game to game.
from game to game. And one of the things I wanted to talk about that I skipped over was your idea of moving. And this is getting real into the weeds of design, but your focus on zone movement as compared to square movement.
Hmm.
So if you look at a game like HeroQuest, you're moving from square to square. Mice and Mystics has kind of squares, but you can kind of see a little bit of zone movement, but you are moving on smaller spaces. And as your games have progressed, the spaces have gotten much bigger. They've gotten more oddly shaped. And talk a little bit about zone movement and why you like that.
I like zone movement because if you think about it, like I don't know why we have such tightly gridded uh, games where you're
Mhm.
counting out your character's movement spaces. Oh, this character's got a movement of 7, and this character's got a movement of 4, and you're counting out their little spaces and stuff, and it's just tedious, especially when you have a lot of enemies on the map and you got to move them, and you have fiddly miniatures or standees that are bumping into each other and stuff. And if you think about basically what movement is in a game is what the grid is for in a game like HeroQuest. It's just getting from point A to point B, so you can fight. And there's only two different kinds of fighting in these games. There's either ranged combat or melee combat. So all you really need is to establish whether a figure is within ranged combat uh, or melee combat. That's
I
all you
totally
really
agree.
need.
Yep. Near, close, or far.
Yeah,
That's how far
exactly,
I like to take things. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So I also, oddly enough, I also like tactical elements in games. Right? I just don't like the tedious, like micromanaged movement when it can be so much more streamlined. But I do like tactical games, and so I would rather play a game with zones and have my character only have like two movement points. It's the same thing. It all comes out the
Yeah, it
same.
is.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Except for I only have to go boom, boom, and now I'm in combat and or whatever. So, and I would love to. I mean, I have all kinds uh, of design ideas and things that play with this even more. And I see that there's a lot of games out there now that do interesting things with movement that aren't just grid based. So,
Yeah, I think there's actually some more interesting things you can do tactically with zones by having you can almost play zones as like an area control kind of thing that you can introduce to where you have majority or equal, and it's really easy to see, hey, we've got three heroes there and there are two monsters there. So the heroes are getting a
or,
bonus because of that.
or just add up the whatchamacallit abilities of all the heroes. Oh, our heroes add up to 6 and the monsters add up to 9. They're overpowering us in that spot.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like zone movement a lot too. I moving a mini or a standee from one space to the next is not something I'm ever excited about. It's not something I remember,
I
you
also
know?
don't like facing. I don't like facing at all.
Yeah.
I can see a purpose for facing in maybe like a stealth game of some kind where
Mhm.
it'd be fun
A
for the character to
vision.
sneak
Yeah.
behind. I want to go sneak behind this guy, and I can see it working in that way. But that doesn't mean you have to have grids. I can see it working with zones really well in that respect.
Well, one game where it did without spaces at all is, remember Fantasy Flight's game, Tannhauser,
Yeah,
with the colored spaces. And if you were in a green space, you could see every other character in a green space.
yeah,
And I think there's that new game Unmatched now that does that a little bit. And having
Yeah.
those color spaces, that's such a brilliant way to do line of sight. You never have to draw, you don't have to
Mhm.
get a ruler, you don't have to, oh, this is going through a corner. I'm like, no, green and green. You can see
Yeah.
that character. Yeah. I'm surprised that more companies or more designers haven't just flat out stolen that idea.
Yeah. Seriously. Yeah.
I mean, I think you kind of do something similar, right? Where you have icons in your zones and there's like an eyeball icon. And
Uh-huh.
instead of tracing from space to space, you trace from that icon to icon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have more control when you're designing your maps to make interesting looking maps because your spaces can be the shape that they need to be in to facilitate those graphics or the visual element of that.
Yeah. Yeah. If you look at I did stuff Fables where it is grid movement on stuff Fables, very strict grid movement and everything. And that was so irritating work having to make my maps,
The
which I'm trying,
art. Hmm.
I had to make all my maps match these grids. And you end up with like, this something that ends up looking more like Minecraft than you really wanted it to look.
Mm,
It's more
hmm.
geometric than I really wanted it to look. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to create this fantasy world with toys and all this stuff, and and I have to adhere to these squares, and I just don't like it.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things in Aftermath was that map board where you were inside the vending machine
Mm.
and just the creative way that the spaces were used. And yeah, that was where that's I think the first time I was like, wow, this is really neat. I really enjoyed this style of map making, and I'm sure that's going to translate into your next game. And this will be hitting. We didn't plan this interview on purpose as part of the crowdfunding campaign, but it's going to be hitting just a couple days after we're talking, and that is Wandering Galaxy, and this is the third game in the new generation of Crossroads games. So we had Forgotten Waters, we had the absolutely brilliant Freelancers, which didn't make my top 10 adventure games of all time, but only because I haven't played it enough. But it did end up on my runners up video for sure. And I that game is brilliant. And now we have Wandering Galaxy, and this is the new Crossroads game that you are designing.
Yes.
And what is the so what's we've talked a little bit about this already, but is that card library, is that kind of like the big thing that's kind of differentiating this from some of your earlier games?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe. It's not that big of a deal, but it's a nice way to organize your cards.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of games, you're like, oh, we have this deck and we have that deck and we have this deck. You need to get this deck out. You need to shuffle this deck. You need to do this deck, and then you have all these decks sitting out on your table. Well, you don't have to do any of that with this. You just pull your card catalog out, set it on the table, and it's already organized with all the cards in it where they need to go. So it's more of a convenience than it is like a
Okay.
big design element.
So you'll have the card library. Are you going to have the spiral bound book with maps,
Yes, just like freelancers and Forgotten
just like
Waters,
freelancers,
same
and
form.
you will have an app. So all of those things combined just allow you to have a lot of freedom, a lot of design freedom, a lot of freedom to tell different types of stories in a board game.
Yeah.
Um, how are you melding all of those together? Like, what are you thinking about when you're designing? Where do you start as designing that kind of game?
Um, I started. This one is weird because it's built upon the structure of the previous two iterations,
Mhm.
which made it easier in some ways because
That technology is already there, right?
yeah, you're going to have an app, you're going to have a book, and you know what the player's basic, um, you know, what they're basically doing when they're playing. They're sticking their little standee out on the book, and they're making a skill check and listening to the app. So what I started doing is the very first thing I started doing when I was thinking about making a space exploration version of one of these Crossroads games is I started designing characters and
Uh-huh.
just designing sci-fi characters that I thought were interesting, and I designed like I don't know, about 25 of them, I think. And and then this is before I even knew that I was actually going to get to work on this. I just started doing it anyways because I thought if I make like a little prototype, I can take it and show it to Colby and the guys, and we can decide whether it's something, you know. But before I even got to that point, Joe, who is like one of the original creators of Forgotten Waters, he approached me about possibly doing a science fiction version of the game, and so I was like, okay, well, I started putting together a story bible for the game, just a world setting story bible, and I got this idea by I ran across this scientific article about this galaxy called JO 109 dash whatever, but it is this black hole that is oddly in motion. Most galaxies are sort of at rest in the universe. Sure, they move, but they're sort of stationary. But this galaxy is kind of roaming around. It's far
Oh,
more.
like the whole galaxy is kind of
Yeah,
moving
yeah,
around.
yeah. Now, of
Interesting.
course, it's moving at such a slow pace, that it's that it's not that big. It's not that interesting. But in my fantasy sci-fi mind, I latched onto this idea and I imagined this big old galaxy just roaming around the universe, just gobbling up other galaxies and stuff. And I thought that would be really a cool setting for a game. And so I started with this premise that this is just a very chaotic and anything can happen kind of galaxy with lots of diversity, lots of different species of people and stuff. And then that was the setting I started with, and I started building out some of the ideas behind the galaxy I wanted to be. I love feudal futures, where
Hmm.
feudalism is the predominant form of politics and stuff. Everything in the galaxy is very it's like based upon a lot of sci-fi tropes, and so uh,
Hmm.
without being really heavy-handed in any one thing, and being vague enough so that you know what you're talking about. When I say the Armada, you know that's the big empire, you know fleets of ships that are sort of in control of the galaxy, and the bad guys are very very straightforward and stuff, so that you can kind of roam around the galaxy doing all these different jobs and everything and experiencing all these different things, and you always have these point of references and stuff.
Now you say jobs are there in the game? Talk a little bit about, is it a large campaign? Is it small kind of bite-sized campaigns like freelancers? Is there side missions like aftermath? What's the kind of what's the overall like from turn to turn gameplay or game to game gameplay?
I call it the game of flying around in space doing stuff.
Yeah, that's cool.
So you are
Random encounters in space.
yeah, you are a part of a crew. You and your fellow players you have this spaceship that you've acquired a spaceship in order to get off of the old space station that you've been living on your whole life, and you're all a bunch of scumbags that uh, you you get in deep with a loan shark in order to acquire a
Oh,
ship.
awesome. Yeah.
So now you have to make your payments, or else it's going to break your legs, right? So you can do jobs for him, or you can just go do whatever jobs you want to do. You acquire jobs fairly easily and very frequently throughout the game, and but you can just make money without even doing jobs. You could actually, you could pick up some cargo at this planet, and you could, find a planet where they buy it off of you for a good
Oh, that
price.
sounds awesome.
Yeah. Or you can do bounty hunting, which is always a reliable way to make some money if you're good at it. Or you can do you could do pirating if you decide that you just want to hunt other ships and blow them up and take their salvage and stuff and then sell it somewhere to make profit. They can do that. There's just a
That's
ton of
really interesting. It sounds more like a more of a sandbox style game than I typically think from you.
yeah. I mean, it's a lot more sandboxy. It's there are three campaigns, but you don't have to play. You don't even have to follow the storylines of the campaigns. Although
Yeah.
you'll be interacting with the main uh, NPCs that are part of that campaign, but you don't really have to follow along with that thing. You can just kind of go off and do your own thing, which would just be flying around space, making money, picking up odd jobs. Some of them are going to be more dangerous than others. You'll find out as you go. Um, that's pretty much what you do.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. That sounds like a mix between something like Zaya, Legends of a Drift System, and was it Star Wars Outer Rim? And I love the way both of those games just give you kind of like the freedom to explore space and take different types of jobs. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I kind of like think of it as like Skyrim. When in Skyrim, you don't really have to follow the main storyline at all. You can really just spend all of
I've
your time
never beaten
in Skyrim,
Skyrim.
just wander around.
300, 500 hours. Yep. I love it.
That's like Lands of Galzyr. Going back to Lands of Galzyr,
Yeah, yeah.
one of the things that I find so interesting about the Lands of Galzyr is there's really no end to. I mean,
There's no there's no story, right? As far as I know,
there,
there's no plot. There's no
there
overall plot.
there's a world plot going on.
Yeah,
There's like
yeah,
some intrigue that like
yeah.
you mildly interact with, but most of it is just going around and exploring your character and how your character interacts with the things that you got going on in the world and stuff. And I just find that for me, that is like my comfort food gaming right there.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's a lot of that kind of thing in Wandering Galaxies. Although what separates it from a game like Lands of Galzyr is in Wandering Galaxies, you're playing cooperatively a lot more with your fellow players. In fact, you have to
Okay.
because you each sort of have a part of the ship that you're controlling and stuff. And
Okay. Yeah, yeah. You have stations.
yeah, ship stations
Yeah,
and stuff, and you have your items and your sidekicks and stuff that help you do that. And then there's a lot more fighting and a lot more yeah, there's a lot more conflict and fighting and that kind of.
conflicts. Yeah, yeah,
There's even a little tact when you get into a space battle. It's like even a little tactical space battle thing that you do when you're fighting in a space battle and stuff like that. None of that stuff is in Lands of Galzyr. And Lands of Galzyr doesn't really focus on fighting hardly at all. You can
yeah.
get weapons, and you need them sometimes to to defend yourself or to as part of the resolution of things. But this is Wandering Galaxy is going to be more like a like a classic pulp sci-fi adventure. It's always going to be a lot of pew pew going on. So
Yeah. One of my only complaint of Lands of Galzyr is character progression. I think it's pretty shallow. There's not a lot of reason to ever really change up your skills in Lands of Galzyr because you never really know what's coming next. And so when you have the opportunity to change your character, it's very arbitrary. How are you handling the character development, the character progression, itemization, skills, and stuff in Wandering Galaxy?
your observation about Lands of Galzyr is spot on. It there is not a lot of character progression and stuff, and that there's a lot more character progression in Wandering Galaxies. Um, it doesn't really bother me in Lands of Galzyr, but in the game that I'm designing, I wanted to have a little bit more. Your character starts off. You have a deck of 10 cards. It's a deck builder, and so
Oh, cool.
you start off with 10 cards. Skill checks are involved basically flipping over 3 cards off of the top of your deck and counting up the skill icons that match the skill check that you're taking. And then you also get to add in any skill icons that are on items or sidekicks that you have, and stuff like that. So to keep on progressing your ability at these skill checks. But as you play the game, you keep on adding more cards, good cards to your deck and making it more powerful. And when bad things happen to you, you'll be adding bad cards to your deck that'll make your deck less powerful. Um, but your character itself has a rank system. So as you gain rank, then you go up and you get these bonuses at the end of each rank threshold. Similar to all previous iterations of the game, you get something cool at the end of each rank.
Yeah.
And you have things like that you can get like scars. Your first scar usually gives you some sort of bonus of some kind, like it adds to your swagger, or it just makes you more intimidating, or it makes you stronger. Maybe it's a psychic scar, a psychological scar that makes you stronger. But then all the other scars you get after that gradually degrade your character. Um, you can get catchphrases, so you can earn catchphrases in the game.
Oh, nice.
And a catchphrase usually comes with some kind of bonus. And so, in order to gain that bonus while you're playing, you have to say your catchphrase, and then you get that bonus. So, just things like that.
That sounds awesome, man. I'm really, really looking forward to that. I think
Mm-hmm.
it sounds really cool. But yes, hey, before we go, I do want to
Mm-hmm.
comment on your t-shirt. Where did you get that t-shirt? Are those for sale? So that's a character in Freelancers, and
Yeah,
that character is hilarious. So that's an NPC that you can get, and he's like a lazy bones.
lazy bones. Yeah,
He, that character made me laugh so hard in the first game I played because I had him and I think I was fighting the dragon or something,
yeah,
and he came up like you had the opportunity. So if you had him as an NPC, you could select something, and he was just like, yeah, he was so chill that nothing could nothing could destroy his vibe.
yeah, yeah. He's like the most worthless character. He doesn't do
Yeah,
anything. Just
no,
lazy,
he just hangs
but he's
out.
funny though. We love him.
Yeah.
I want to actually get Lazy Bones T-shirt. I want that T-shirt.
You want Lazy Bones t-shirt? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I want that one right there. A little.
I love that character. Are there NPCs in Wandering Galaxy?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool, cool.
Sidekicks. So
Sidekicks. All right, yeah.
yeah, and
Oh man, well that sounds awesome.
and then when you're playing solo or two-player, then you also have apprentices, which you'll be controlling. They're kind of like stripped down characters that you'll be
Kind of
controlling.
like in Freelancers where you have your half character kind of thing. Yep, that's
Yeah,
perfect. That's such a good way to handle a party-based game in solo. Because I like playing two characters usually in a solo game. Three kind of stretches it. But if I have the opportunity to play one main character and then maybe up to three half characters or stripped down characters that offer kind of a utility power, then
yeah,
that's perfect. Yeah, that sounds great. That
yep.
sounds great.
That's
Well,
pretty.
hey, Jerry, thank you so much for spending the time with us today with the Dungeon Dive. This has been really, really cool to kind of like go back through all of your game design thoughts and the progress and evolution of your games is really interesting. There is this through line from all of your games that I think most people I think can see it. I don't think it takes some kind of like game critic or other game designer to see it, but you have a real steady progress through your games. So
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Looking back on it, everything. Maybe I just stay in my lane.
yeah, hey, it's a good lane. I think it's a good lane to stay in. So, but all right, guys. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with Jerry and I today, and we will talk to you later.
Thank you.